Hi folks, it's Paul here, and it's just over 5 years since I did my very first Powerwall video. So definitely a good time to review what I've done and how the batteries are going, and in particular how the very first cells that I built back when I didn't really know much, how they're holding up, because it's a good test of random laptop batteries thrown together to see how they last, and hopefully that will give us a little indication on how any batteries we build today will last in the next 5 or 10 years. So let's have a look. In that very first video I talked about this lawnmower battery that I built. So this was made, would have been late 2015 I think, so 6 years ago. It's a 7S12P pack, no BMS, because at the time I couldn't find a BMS that would work at 100 amps, which is what the lawnmower peaks at. So what's interesting about this is I'm still using this today. It gets used once a week, maybe once a fortnight in winter. It peaks at 100 amps, so that means that each cell is being drawn somewhere in the region of 8 amps at its worst, which is pretty amazing for these recycled laptop cells. I certainly wouldn't have predicted that this would still be going fine. Because it doesn't have a BMS, I always recharge it. Well, it used to be with this old iMax V8, nice cheap old charger that worked okay. So that means that it's nicely balanced every time it's charged, and then it gets drained. So that way I can live without a BMS, without too much drama. I subsequently built a second battery, and I didn't do nearly as good a job of selecting my cells. And that second battery overheated, fuses blew, and at one point I managed to ignite one of the cells. So that was a bit of a nightmare. This one has been fine. And I think the thing that I was really careful with when I selected these cells is I had 300 odd pairs of these cells at the time, and these were by the cells that had the lowest internal resistance. So that has been a roaring success, still going strong after maybe 6 years. So that is a good news story, and slightly unexpected. This is the second battery that I showed in that very first video. So this is another one that would have been built late 2015. And once again, I didn't at that time use cell level fuses, but I was starting to realize that that was a good idea, so I retro installed this line of cell level fuses to see how feasible that was. And this was kind of a training pack towards building a larger 2 kilowatt-hour pack. This one's a 1 kilowatt-hour, and I was using it for my son's go-kart, and it would also get drained pretty hard. Let's see how well it's going. It's pretty out of whack. The highest cell is at 4.17. So this BMS hasn't been that good. It's a pretty old BMS. These days I would be using a Delhi Green BMS, one of those kind of things, which seems to be of a slightly higher quality. My son doesn't use the go-kart anymore, so this was connected to the rest of my Powerwall. What I'll probably do now is rip these all apart. I'll either rebalance it and see if it stays balanced, or I will pull the whole thing apart because it's still soldered directly. There's only solder level fuses on this group here, so I don't particularly trust it anymore. So it's probably time to retire this pack. But that probably ran reasonably well under a fair bit of abuse for 4 years. And given that this was the first decent sized pack that I built, I think that's not too bad. That's a fair effort. Then came this 2 kilowatt hour pack that all my early Powerwall videos were about. The construction of this and how I went about it, and in quite a lot of detail. It's a 2 kilowatt hour pack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, 48P7S. So it's a 24 volt, 2 kilowatt hour pack. I was using cell level fuses now. Those who've watched my early videos know I was a keen advocate of using the cells, keeping the cells as pairs, which meant that when you soldered the cell level fuse, you were soldering to the strap from the original laptop battery, and that put a lot less heat strain. It was much easier to deal with, and it reduced the number of joints and so on. So this pack here I've just decommissioned. There's the remains of a dead spider there. This pack here I've just had to remove from being part of my main Powerwall because I discovered group 1 was dying, basically. So for a while I noticed that this part of my Powerwall was running a bit lower than everything else, and if I wasn't getting much solar, then the whole Powerwall was losing capacity faster than I thought it should. And I narrowed it down to this pack here, and then after disconnecting the BMS and just letting all the cells float on their own, I discovered that group 1 was slowly fading, and then over time it was plummeting. And now, group 1 is 1.5 volts, so it's really dead. So ideally I should rip this apart fairly quickly and find out which pair, and I'm assuming that one pair has really died and is sucking the power out of everything else. So that's the situation with this one. It was built in 2016 and it ran fairly happily to about 2020, early 2020. So I got a good 4 years out of it. So now the question is, what did I do wrong? And I think from memory, and I'd have to go back and review my own videos, I think I included a fairly wide spread of capacities in this pack because I didn't have many cells. About the time that I was doing this, Pete over at Second Life Storage was building up his packs, and he was doing a much better job of harvesting twice as many cells and then being more fussy about the spread between the highest capacity and lowest capacity. And in the ideal world, you want them to be all the same capacity and all have really nice low internal resistance. And I suspect that's what I think from memory I cut some corners and I included some cells that weren't in the same ballpark as the others. If I was doing this one again, I would be more patient and wait until I collected more cells and not include cells that were more than, say, 100 milliamp hours below the highest capacity cells. That's what I'm hoping I would do. So in this pack I even had a thermal cut-off, so that, although just one temperature sensor that was connected to these PC fans, so that it would, if the temperature got too high, it would blow air in through the bottom, which I think was a cool feature that never ever got used. It's never been driven hard enough. The only circumstance in which this would overheat would be if a cell died severely and overheated and had thermal runaway. And in that case, I don't think these fans would have done anything more than provide further oxygen for the combustion. So for a Powerwall, I don't think the fans are worth it. That's my experience, but that's here in New Zealand, where the temperature never goes above 30 degrees in my garage here, and never goes below 5 degrees probably. So it's fairly benign in terms of lithium-ion cells. If you live in Arizona or somewhere super hot, middle of Australia, then you might consider cooling to be more important. Alright, let's have a look at the rest of my system. So this is the system as it is today. I no longer have my original 2 kilowatt-hour system. I also have removed the 1 kilowatt of go-kart battery, and I've removed the LiFePO pack that I had made from these pouch cells, and I have reconfigured that pack to become a 12 volt pack for a tiny house. So I've got 1 kilowatt, 2 kilowatts, 3 kilowatts, 4 kilowatts, and another 2 up there, each with its own BMS. And those are all connected in parallel up to they've been charged by the solar charge controller, and the power goes out to various LED lights and bits and bobs, and charging my e-bike, which is good. What else? Oh, and the 3 kilowatt inverter, which is used to run 230 volt AC stuff here in the garage and in the house. And it's also running LED lighting here in the garage. The system's going fine. Some of my early packs have died after about 5 years. That's okay. I am quite happy to accept that kind of attrition rate. I think as I have learnt more, and we've all learnt a lot more over the years, I'm more fussy about rejecting cells, so I don't try to revive any 0 volt cells. I throw out any cells with high internal resistance. I throw out any cells that are quite low capacity. Anything under 1000 milliamps is a waste of time. Under 1500 is also probably a waste of time. These days, 1500 milliamps of capacity is about my threshold, in that kind of ballpark. What else have I learnt? The big picture learnings are this whole exercise has been well worthwhile. I've got a system that suits my needs. I've made some mistakes, particularly with all my slightly Mickey Mouse connections. They have been a risky factor for me. You'll notice this burn mark. That was because of a poor connection, and I've had another near fire incident because of bad connections. So system design and connections is a real issue for me. I tend to be a little bit too sloppy and Mickey Mouse with my design. I accept that. If you're watching Jehu Garcia videos, you'll know he's a firm believer in putting these all in a metal box. That's probably very sensible advice. Otherwise, the system is working fine for me. I need to spend a bit of time tidying it up and improving the connections, but the fundamentals of the cells working fine, the solar charging is working fine, and 6 kilowatt hours is perfectly adequate for what I'm using it for at the moment. If I ever get to the point of increasing my solar panels enough to charge my electric car, then I'll want a lot more Powerwall. But I'm not there yet. And that's about it, really. Feel free to ask me any questions you've got. Thanks for watching, and catch you next time. Cheers!